July 4th, 1943, 11:47 p.m. Butovo, Soviet Union, 14 kilometers from the front line. Colonel General Heinz Guderian stands alone in a dimly lit command post, his face illuminated only by the flickering glow of a kerosene lamp. His hands tremble, not from fear, but from rage. In his grip he holds a telegram that confirms his worst nightmare. Operation Citadel will begin in exactly 5 hours and 13 minutes. For 3 agonizing months, he has done everything in his power to stop this attack. He has argued, he has pleaded, he has presented every piece of evidence he could gather, and Adolf Hitler has ignored him completely. Tomorrow morning, nearly 1 million German soldiers will advance into the largest tank battle in human history. They will attack a position so heavily fortified that even the Soviets cannot believe their luck. And leading the assault will be the weapon Hitler has been waiting for. 200 brand new Panther tanks that Guderian knows, with absolute certainty, are not ready for combat. He whispers into the darkness, "We are about to commit suicide." But here's the thing. Guderian wasn't just pessimistic. He wasn't simply being cautious. He had seen the intelligence reports. He had inspected the Panthers himself. He knew exactly what was about to happen. And in less than 18 days, every single prediction he made would come true with horrifying precision. So how did the German war machine reach this point? How did Hitler become so obsessed with 200 tanks that he was willing to sacrifice the entire Eastern Front to get them? And why did nobody, not his generals, not his advisors, not even the men who would have to die executing this plan, manage to change his mind? If you find this story as fascinating as I do, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow, and trust me, the story is about to get much, much worse. Let's go back 5 months. February 2nd, 1943, Stalingrad has just fallen. The news hits Berlin like a physical blow. For the first time in the war, an entire German army has surrendered. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, the man Hitler personally promoted just days before to ensure he would fight to the death, has handed over nearly 91,000 soldiers to the Soviets. Another 147,000 German and Axis troops have already died in the rubble of that frozen city. The Sixth Army, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, the force that had conquered France in 6 weeks, simply no longer exists. Hitler refuses to appear in public for 3 days. When he finally emerges, his hands shake noticeably during meetings. His physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, increases his daily injections. The Führer barely sleeps. His staff notices that he has aged visibly in less than a week. But Hitler's mind is already working on something else. He needs a victory. Not just any victory, a spectacular one. Something that will prove to the world that Germany is still invincible. Something that will restore the morale of his armies and terrify Stalin into negotiating. And as he stares at the map of the Eastern Front, one feature catches his attention immediately. The Kursk salient. It's impossible to miss. The Soviet advance during the winter offensive has created a massive bulge in the German lines. A bubble of territory that extends nearly 200 kilometers westward and 150 kilometers northward. At its widest point, the salient measures roughly 240 kilometers across. Inside this bulge are some of the best Soviet formations, including tank armies and Guards rifle divisions that have just finished crushing the German position at Stalingrad. To Hitler, this salient looks like an opportunity. If German forces attack simultaneously from the north and south, they can pinch off the bulge and encircle everything inside. It would be the largest encirclement operation since Kiev in 1941, when the Wehrmacht captured over 600,000 Soviet prisoners. A victory at Kursk could trap between 4 and 5 Soviet armies. It could destroy the offensive capability that the Red Army has built up over the winter. It could change everything. There's just one problem. The man Hitler has assigned to rebuild Germany's armored forces thinks this plan is insane. Heinz Guderian is 54 years old in February 1943. And his career has been a remarkable roller coaster. He is widely credited as the father of German armored warfare. His book, Achtung Panzer, published in 1937, revolutionized military thinking across Europe. During the invasion of France, his 1902nd Panzer Corps achieved one of the most stunning victories in military history, racing from the German border to the English Channel in just 11 days. But success has made Guderian arrogant, and arrogance has made him enemies. During the battle for Moscow in December 1941, he directly disobeyed Hitler's order to hold ground at all costs. He ordered his exhausted troops to retreat in the face of the Soviet winter counteroffensive, saving his corps from annihilation but infuriating the Führer. Hitler relieved him of command and sent him into reserve, a polite form of military exile. For over a year, Guderian has been living in forced retirement, watching from the sidelines as the German army he helped build tears itself apart on the Eastern Front. Then, on February 28, 1943, less than 4 weeks after Stalingrad, Hitler summons him back. The meeting takes place at the Führer's headquarters in Vinnitsa, Ukraine. When Guderian walks in, he barely recognizes the man sitting at the map table. Hitler's complexion has gone gray. His left hand trembles constantly. His uniform hangs loosely on a frame that has clearly lost weight. But when Hitler begins speaking, his eyes still burn with that unsettling intensity that has mesmerized millions. "I have decided to appoint you Inspector General of Armored Troops," Hitler says. "You will have full authority to reorganize our panzer forces. You will report directly to me. No one will interfere with your work." Guderian is stunned. This is more power than any German general has held over armored forces since the beginning of the war. He will control everything from tank design to crew training to tactical doctrine. For a man who has spent 14 months in disgrace, it's an almost unbelievable rehabilitation. But Guderian is also suspicious. Why now? Why him? And what exactly does Hitler expect him to do? The answer becomes clear within days. The German panzer force is in catastrophic condition. At Stalingrad alone, the Wehrmacht lost over 500 tanks. Across the Eastern Front during the winter of 1942-1943, total German tank strength has dropped below 900 operational vehicles, less than what they had on the first day of Operation Barbarossa. And the Soviets? Intelligence estimates suggest they now have between 7,000 and 9,000 tanks. More importantly, Soviet factories are producing T-34s at a rate of over 1,000 per month. Germany, even with its entire industrial base mobilized, can barely manage 300. Guderian spends his first weeks inspecting repair depots, training facilities, and production lines. What he finds horrifies him. Tanks that should be in combat are sitting in warehouses waiting for spare parts. New crews are being sent to the front with less than 20 hours of driving experience. Tank destroyers designed for defensive warfare are being squandered in hopeless offensive operations. And then there are the Panthers. The Panzer V. Panther is supposed to be Germany's answer to the T-34. With its sloped armor, powerful 75mm gun, and advanced suspension, it should be superior to anything the Soviets can field. The problem is that the Panther exists mainly on paper. The first production models are just rolling off the assembly lines, and they are plagued with mechanical defects. Guderian visits the Panther production facility at MAN in Nuremberg in early March. He speaks with the engineers, he examines the tanks, he reads the testing reports, and what he learns makes his blood run cold. The Panther's engine has a tendency to catch fire. The transmission fails at an alarming rate. The suspension breaks under the stress of cross-country movement. Crews report that the tank is difficult to steer and impossible to maintain in field conditions. In one test, 14 Panthers were driven 200 kilometers. Only 4 completed the journey without breakdown. When Guderian returns to headquarters, he carries a blunt assessment. The Panther is not ready for combat. It will not be ready for combat for at least 6 months. Any operation that depends on these tanks is courting disaster. But by this time, Hitler has already set his mind on Kursk, and Hitler has already decided that the Panthers will be the key to victory. This brings us to one of the strangest and most consequential meetings of the entire war. March 9, 1943, the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. The subject of the meeting is Operation Citadel, the planned offensive against the Kursk salient. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein has just executed a brilliant counterattack at Kharkov, destroying several Soviet tank corps and stabilizing the German line. The spring mud season, the infamous Rasputitsa, has brought major operations to a halt. Both sides are catching their breath. Hitler wants to use this pause to prepare for his summer offensive. He presents his vision, a massive pincer attack that will crush the Kursk salient and annihilate the Soviet forces inside. The northern pincer will be led by Field Marshal Walter Model's 9th Army, attacking southward from the Oral area. The southern pincer will be Manstein's Army Group South, attacking northward from the Belgorod sector. When the two pincers meet, they will have encircled potentially 5 Soviet armies, perhaps 60 divisions, maybe more. On paper, it sounds magnificent. In practice, Guderian sees disaster. He raises his hand. Hitler acknowledges him with a nod. "Mein Führer," Guderian begins carefully, "I must express serious reservations about this operation." The room goes quiet. Questioning Hitler's strategic judgment has become increasingly dangerous over the past year. Several generals have lost their commands, or their freedom, for less. But Guderian presses on. The Kursk salient is the most obvious target on the entire Eastern Front. The Soviets know we will attack there. They have known since February. Every day we delay, they are digging deeper defenses. Hitler waves his hand dismissively. The Soviets cannot match German soldiers in open battle. Once our panzers break through, their defenses will collapse. With respect, mein Führer, our panzer strength is inadequate for an operation of this scale. We have perhaps 1,700 tanks available. The Soviets have at least 3,000 in the salient alone, with more in reserve. Our numerical disadvantage has never been greater. Hitler's eyes narrow. That is precisely why we must wait for the Panthers. With 200 Panthers added to our forces, we will have a qualitative advantage that will overcome any numerical inferiority. Guderian takes a deep breath. This is the moment he has been dreading. Mein Führer, I must inform you that the Panther is not combat ready. Our tests show catastrophic reliability problems. The engine overheats, the transmission breaks. More than half of the Panthers produced so far have required major repairs before even reaching the front. If we send these tanks into battle, they will break down before they reach the enemy. The silence in the room becomes oppressive. Several officers glance nervously at each other. They have seen what happens when someone tells Hitler things he doesn't want to hear. But Hitler does something unexpected. He doesn't explode. He doesn't dismiss Guderian. Instead, he leans forward with an expression that's almost conciliatory. I understand your concerns, Guderian. That is why I am prepared to delay the operation. We will give the factories time to fix the problems. We will not attack until the Panthers are ready. And just like that, Hitler has accidentally made everything worse. The original date for Operation Citadel was early May. Hitler's decision to wait for the Panthers pushes it back first to mid-May, then to early June, and finally to July 5th, a delay of nearly 2 months. What happens during those 2 months will determine the outcome of the war. On the German side, the delays allow production of additional Panthers. By early July, approximately 200 Panthers are available for the offensive, exactly as Hitler wanted. Some of the mechanical problems have been addressed. The crews have received additional training. German commanders tell themselves that the new tanks might actually work. But on the Soviet side, something far more significant is happening. Joseph Stalin knows the attack is coming. Soviet intelligence has penetrated German military communications at multiple levels. The Lucy spy ring in Switzerland provides detailed information from sources inside the German High Command. Partisan units behind German lines report every troop movement, aerial reconnaissance, photographs every defensive position. But Stalin doesn't even need spies to know where the Germans will attack. A single glance at the map makes the Kursk salient obvious. Any military academy cadet could identify it as the prime target for a pincer operation. The only question is when. Stalin's response is unprecedented in the history of warfare. He orders the construction of the deepest defensive system ever built, not just trenches and bunkers. That would be World War I thinking. Instead, the Soviets create 8 separate defensive lines, each between 10 and 15 kilometers deep. The combined depth of these defenses exceeds 250 kilometers. In the salient, Soviet soldiers dig over 5,000 kilometers of trenches, enough to stretch from Moscow to Paris. They lay more than 1 million landmines. They install over 200,000 firing positions for machine guns, anti-tank rifles, and artillery pieces. They pre-register every approach route for artillery fire. They construct anti-tank ditches that can stop any armored vehicle. They position 20,000 artillery pieces and rocket launchers to create kill zones of unprecedented lethality. And they wait. Every day that Hitler delays for his Panthers, the Soviet defenses grow stronger. Every week that passes, more mines are buried. Every month that the Germans hesitate, more reserves are brought forward. By early July, the Central Front and Voronezh Front defending the Kursk salient have amassed nearly 1.9 million soldiers, over 5,000 tanks, and 20,000 artillery pieces. The Steppe Front, positioned behind them as a reserve, adds another 500,000 troops and over 1,500 tanks. But the most crucial element of the Soviet defense isn't the mines or the artillery or even the tanks, it's the doctrine. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the victor of Moscow and Stalingrad, argues for a strategy that goes against every Soviet instinct. Let the Germans attack first. Let them exhaust themselves against the defenses. Let them lose their tanks in the minefields and their infantry in the kill zones. And only then, when the German offensive has been bled white, launch a massive counteroffensive that will not only recapture the salient, but destroy the entire German position in Ukraine. Stalin agrees. For the first time in the war, the Soviets will deliberately absorb a German offensive instead of attacking preemptively. They will use defense in depth, multiple lines of resistance, to wear down German strength. They will trade space for time and enemy casualties. It's a gamble. If the German assault breaks through before it loses momentum, the consequences could be catastrophic. But Zhukov is confident. He has studied the German methods, he understands their dependence on rapid armored breakthrough, and he believes that the defenses at Kursk can stop any attack the Germans can mount. Meanwhile, back at German headquarters, Guderian is making one last desperate attempt to stop the operation. June 18, 1943, Obersalzberg, Hitler's mountain retreat. The summer sun blazes down on the Bavarian Alps as Guderian arrives for a private meeting with the Führer. He has requested this meeting specifically to discuss Kursk. He knows it may be his final chance. Hitler receives him in the main conference room, standing before a large map of the Eastern Front. He looks tired, but animated. The prospect of offensive action seems to energize him more than anything else. Guderian dispenses with pleasantries. There isn't time. Mein Führer, I must tell you that our armored commanders have grave doubts about this operation. Field Marshal Model has submitted a detailed assessment showing that the Soviet defenses are now so strong that, even with the Panthers, a breakthrough is extremely doubtful. Hitler shrugs. Model always exaggerates enemy strength. It's his nature. But the aerial photographs confirm his analysis. The Soviets have built defensive belts that extend dozens of kilometers in depth. We have never faced anything like this. Our tactics depend on rapid penetration, but there is nothing to penetrate, just one defensive line after another. Hitler's expression hardens. And what do you propose instead? That we sit here and wait for the Soviets to attack us? That we surrender the initiative and let Stalin choose when and where to strike? I propose that we cancel Citadel entirely and use our armored forces defensively. Let the Soviets attack. Let them exhaust themselves against our defenses. Then, when they are overextended, we counterattack. It's the exact strategy that Zhukov is planning to use against the Germans, and Hitler instantly rejects it. Impossible. The German soldier must attack. That is his nature. That is his strength. A defensive posture would destroy morale and give the enemy time to build up even greater forces. No, Guderian, the attack must proceed. Guderian tries one more approach. Then at least consider postponing until autumn. Use the summer to accumulate more Panthers, fix the mechanical problems completely, build up our infantry strength. By October, the Soviets will have twice as many tanks as they have now. Their factories are producing over 1,000 T-34s every month. Ours are producing fewer than 300 Panthers. Every day we delay, the balance shifts further against us. Hitler pauses, then adds with an intensity that makes Guderian's skin crawl. Whenever I think of this attack, my stomach turns over. Guderian seizes on this. Then trust your instincts, mein Führer. If the operation troubles you this much, there must be a reason. But Hitler shakes his head. No, my instincts tell me we must attack before it is too late. The Panthers are ready now. We're close enough. We cannot wait any longer. The meeting is over. As Guderian drives back down the mountain road, he feels a deep sense of despair. He has done everything he can. He has presented every argument. He has warned everyone who will listen. And it has made no difference at all. In 2 weeks, Operation Citadel will begin, and Heinz Guderian will watch his worst predictions come true. July 4th, 1943, the night before the attack. Along a front of nearly 300 kilometers, more than 900,000 German soldiers prepare for battle. In the north, Model's 9th Army has assembled nearly 335,000 men and over 1,000 tanks and assault guns. In the south, Manstein's Army Group South commits over 350,000 men and approximately 1,500 tanks, including nearly all 200 Panthers. The German plan calls for a classic pincer movement. Model will attack southward toward Kursk. Manstein will attack northward toward the same objective. Where they meet, they will have encircled the entire salient. If everything goes according to plan, the operation should take about a week, perhaps 2 at most. But nothing goes according to plan, not even close. At 10:30 p.m., just hours before the German attack is scheduled to begin, the Soviet artillery opens fire. The effect is devastating. Soviet intelligence has predicted the exact time of the German offensive. Zhukov has ordered a preemptive bombardment to disrupt German assembly areas and shock the attackers before they can begin. More than 2,000 artillery pieces and rocket launchers fire simultaneously along the southern sector. The explosions light up the night sky like a continuous lightning storm. German soldiers, crowded into their jumping-off positions, scramble for cover. Communications lines are cut, command posts are hit, supply dumps explode. At German headquarters, panic briefly takes hold. How did the Soviets know? Have the assault plans been compromised? Should the attack be postponed? But it's too late to change course now. The German army is committed. At 5:30 a.m. on July 5th, the German artillery finally responds. Over 10,000 guns and rocket launchers fire the opening bombardment of Operation Citadel. The noise is beyond description, a physical force that shakes the earth and deafens everyone within kilometers. Then the tanks begin to move. In the south, the Germans achieve some initial success. The new Tiger tanks, with their massive 80mm guns and thick armor, prove nearly invincible against Soviet anti-tank weapons. They create gaps in the first defensive line. German infantry pours through behind them. But the Panthers, Hitler's wonder weapons, the tanks that were supposed to change everything, are a disaster. Of the approximately 200 Panthers committed to the southern offensive, nearly half break down before reaching the front line. Their engines overheat in the summer heat. Their transmissions fail under the stress of combat. Their crews, still unfamiliar with the complex machinery, make mistakes that compound the mechanical problems. Those Panthers that do reach combat face another terrible surprise. The Soviets have developed new anti-tank tactics specifically for dealing with German armor. Instead of trying to stop tanks at the front lines, they allow German armor to penetrate into kill zones where it can be attacked from multiple directions. The Panthers' thin side armor, a design compromise to save weight, proves vulnerable to Soviet 76mm guns that would bounce harmlessly off the frontal plate. By the end of the first day, the southern pincer has advanced between 6 and 8 kilometers. Significant progress, but far short of the breakthrough that was supposed to happen. And the Soviets are already counterattacking, probing for weak points, trying to cut off the advancing German units. In the north, the situation is even worse. Model's 9th Army attacks into the most heavily fortified sector of the Soviet line. The defensive system here is even deeper than in the south, 8 belts of fortifications extending more than 30 kilometers. Every village has been converted into a strong point. Every hilltop bristles with artillery. On the first day, Model advances between 8 and 10 kilometers, but his losses are staggering. Some divisions report casualty rates exceeding 20%. Tank battalions that began the day with 40 vehicles end it with fewer than 20. And there are still dozens of kilometers to go. July 6th, 7th, 8th. The battle continues with unrelenting fury. German engineers work desperately to clear paths through Soviet minefields. For every minefield they neutralize, another appears behind it. Soviet infantry emerges from bunkers that seemed destroyed hours ago. Artillery bombardments that should have annihilated entire positions somehow leave defenders alive and fighting. The Panthers continue to fail. German mechanics work through the night, every night, trying to repair broken transmissions and overheated engines. They cannibalize parts from destroyed tanks to keep others running. They jury-rig solutions that would make peacetime engineers shudder. But it's not enough. The Panthers' fundamental design flaws cannot be fixed in the field. By July 9th, German commanders in the north are reporting that the offensive has reached its culminating point. They simply cannot push any farther. Their tank strength has been halved. Their infantry divisions are exhausted. And ahead of them, the Soviet defenses are as strong as ever. Model requests permission to go over to the defensive. Hitler refuses. In the south, the situation appears slightly more promising. Manstein's forces have advanced nearly 35 kilometers in places. They are approaching the town of Prokhorovka, a major rail junction that controls the approaches to Kursk. If they can take Prokhorovka, the offensive might yet succeed. But what awaits them at Prokhorovka will become one of the most famous and most controversial tank battles in history. July 12, 1943, 6:30 a.m. The morning mist still hangs over the fields southwest of Prokhorovka as German tank crews eat a cold breakfast and check their vehicles for the 100th time. The Tsaui SS Panzer Corps has assembled over 300 tanks and assault guns for the day's attack. Across from them, hidden in villages and tree lines, the Soviet 5th Guards tank army waits with over 800 tanks of its own. What happens next is a matter of considerable historical debate. Soviet accounts describe an apocalyptic clash of armor, the largest tank battle in history, with over 1,200 tanks fighting at point-blank range in a swirling melee that lasted all day. German records suggest something less dramatic, but equally decisive. A Soviet counterattack that, while costly for both sides, stopped the German advance cold. The truth lies somewhere in between. Both sides committed the bulk of their armor to a relatively small area. Both sides suffered tremendous losses. Tank wrecks littered the battlefield so thickly that recovery teams worked for weeks to clear them. But the critical point is this. At the end of July 12th, the German offensive at Kursk was effectively over. The southern pincer had advanced as far as it ever would. The northern pincer had already stalled, and the Soviets were preparing to launch their own offensive operations that would dwarf anything the Germans had attempted. That evening, Adolf Hitler summons his commanders to his headquarters to deliver news that stuns everyone present. He is canceling Operation Citadel. The reason? On July 10th, Allied forces had landed in Sicily. Italy, Germany's most important ally, was suddenly under direct attack. Hitler needed forces to respond to this new threat, and the only place to get them was the Eastern Front. Some historians have suggested that Sicily was just an excuse, that Hitler was looking for a way to end the Kursk offensive without admitting defeat. Perhaps. But the result was the same. The German army, which had begun the summer with dreams of encircling Soviet armies, would end it in desperate retreat. And Heinz Guderian? He would watch as everything he predicted came true. The Battle of Kursk had cost the German army approximately 200,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. Tank losses exceeded 700 vehicles, including most of the Panthers that Hitler had waited so long to receive. These losses, unlike earlier disasters, could not be replaced. German tank production was already stretched to its limits. The crews who died at Kursk represented years of training that could never be recovered. The Soviets had also suffered terribly, perhaps 250,000 casualties of their own, along with substantial tank losses. But Soviet losses could be replaced. Soviet factories continued to produce T-34s at rates the Germans could never match. Soviet training programs continued to churn out new crews. The Red Army that emerged from Kursk was not weakened but strengthened, tempered by fire, confident in its ability to defeat the Wehrmacht in open battle. August 3, 1943. The Soviets launch Operation Polkovodets-Rumyantsev, the counteroffensive that Zhukov had planned all along. The German forces, exhausted from their failed offensive, cannot hold. Within a week, the Soviets have recaptured Belgorod. Within a month, they have liberated Kharkov, the same city that Manstein had so brilliantly recaptured in February. By the end of the summer, the Germans have been pushed back over 150 kilometers. And it doesn't stop there. The Soviet counteroffensive continues through the autumn and into the winter. By December 1943, the Red Army has crossed the Dnieper River, the last major natural defensive line in western Ukraine. Kiev falls on November 6th. The Germans, who began 1943 holding most of Ukraine, end the year with their positions crumbling across the entire southern front. The strategic implications are profound. After Kursk, the German army never again launches a successful major offensive on the eastern front. The initiative has passed permanently to the Soviets. From this point forward, the war in the east will be a continuous German retreat, sometimes orderly, often chaotic, always costly, that will only end when Soviet soldiers raise the red flag over the Reichstag in Berlin. Guderian understood all of this before it happened. He saw the trap that Hitler was walking into. He tried everything in his power to prevent it, and he failed. In his memoirs, written after the war, Guderian reflects on the Kursk decision with barely contained bitterness. The attack had been launched, and immediately after the first successes, it was broken off. The Panzer troops, which had been committed in such strength, lost their best men and their material. We were faced with the task of rebuilding, but the losses in men could no longer be replaced. There's a devastating simplicity to that statement. The losses in men could no longer be replaced. By waiting for 200 Panthers, most of which broke down before they could fire a shot, Hitler had sacrificed something far more valuable: time. And that time had allowed the Soviets to build defenses that made German victory impossible. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Kursk story is what might have been. Some historians have argued that if Hitler had attacked in May, as originally planned, the operation might have succeeded. Soviet defenses were far less developed in early May. The minefields were incomplete. The defensive lines were shallower. The reserves were not yet in position. Would an earlier attack have broken through? We can never know for certain. The Soviets were formidable opponents, and their defensive capabilities might have surprised the Germans even without 2 extra months of preparation. But the possibility haunts military historians to this day. Others argue that the entire concept of citadel was flawed from the beginning. Even a successful encirclement would not have destroyed Soviet offensive capability. The Red Army had proven at Stalingrad that it could absorb catastrophic losses and keep fighting. Destroying a few armies at Kursk might have delayed the Soviet advance, but it would not have changed the fundamental strategic situation. Germany was being outproduced, outmanned, and outfought on every front. Guderian himself came to believe that the only sensible strategy after Stalingrad was to go on the defensive in the east and use German armored forces as a mobile reserve, striking Soviet offensives as they developed, trading space for time and hoping for a political solution to the war. Whether this strategy could have succeeded is another matter entirely. By 1943, neither Stalin, nor Roosevelt, nor Churchill had any interest in negotiating with Hitler. The war would continue until Germany was completely defeated. But one thing is certain. The strategy Hitler chose, the strategy of waiting for wonder weapons, of attacking the most obvious target on the map, of throwing away irreplaceable panzer divisions against prepared defenses, was the worst possible option. It combined maximum cost with minimum gain. It turned a difficult situation into an impossible one. And at the center of it all was a man who saw the disaster coming and could do nothing to stop it. September 1943. Heinz Guderian continues his work as Inspector General of Armored Troops, but his influence is waning. The Panthers are gradually being improved, the worst mechanical problems are being fixed, and the tank will eventually become one of the best of the war. But it's too late. The moment when superior German tanks might have made a difference has passed. Guderian continues to argue with Hitler, continues to present uncomfortable truths, continues to push for rational strategic decisions, and Hitler continues to ignore him, just as he ignored him before Kursk. In July 1944, Guderian is appointed Chief of the Army General Staff, the highest operational position in the German army. It's a poisoned chalice. By this time, the war is clearly lost. The Western Allies have landed in Normandy. The Soviets are preparing for the massive offensive that will destroy Army Group Center. Germany is being crushed from both directions. Guderian spends the last year of the war in a series of increasingly futile arguments with Hitler. He tries to organize coherent defensive strategies. Hitler insists on holding every inch of ground. He tries to evacuate German forces from untenable positions. Hitler forbids retreats. He tries to concentrate armored reserves for decisive counterattacks. Hitler disperses them across the front in penny packets. On March 28, 1945, just 6 weeks before Germany's surrender, Hitler dismisses Guderian for the final time. The official reason is ill health. The real reason is that Guderian has become impossible to work with. He argues too much. He questions orders too openly. He refuses to tell Hitler what he wants to hear. Guderian goes into retirement. He will survive the war, unlike so many of his colleagues, and live until 1954. In his final years, he will write his memoirs, consult with Western military officials during the early Cold War, and reflect on a career that included both spectacular triumphs and devastating failures. But the failure that haunted him most was Kursk. I suggested that we should not attack at Kursk at all, he wrote. I said that the attack would cost us too much in tanks, and that we should be better advised to conserve our strength for the defensive operations that would inevitably follow. I pointed out that the enemy was expecting our attack, and that the element of surprise, upon which success largely depended, would be lacking. He had been right about everything. The attack had cost too much. The defensive operations that followed were impossible without adequate tank strength. The Soviets had expected the attack. The element of surprise was completely lacking. And none of it had mattered. Hitler had waited for his 200 Panthers, and in doing so, had lost the Eastern Front forever. The story of Kursk offers a profound lesson about leadership, decision-making, and the dangers of strategic inflexibility. Hitler's obsession with the Panther tank blinded him to the larger strategic picture. He focused on a single variable, the number of new tanks available, while ignoring all the other factors that would determine success or failure. He waited for a technological solution to what was fundamentally a strategic problem. Meanwhile, his opponent understood the situation with perfect clarity. Stalin and Zhukov recognized that time was on their side. Every day of delay allowed them to strengthen their defenses, accumulate reserves, and prepare the counteroffensive that would follow. They turned Hitler's obsession against him. The irony is bitter. Hitler delayed the attack because he wanted to ensure success, but the delay itself made success impossible. By waiting for perfect conditions that could never exist, he guaranteed the worst possible outcome. It's a pattern that repeats throughout history. Leaders become so focused on a particular tool or technology that they lose sight of the larger objective. They delay action, waiting for conditions to improve, not realizing that delay itself is making conditions worse. They prioritize what can be measured, the number of tanks, the amount of ammunition, the strength of particular units, over factors that cannot be easily quantified but matter just as much. Guderian saw this trap clearly. His training, his experience, his understanding of armored warfare all told him that the Kursk offensive was doomed. But he lacked the power to change course. In a system where one man made all final decisions, and where that man was increasingly detached from reality, expertise and experience counted for nothing. The Battle of Kursk was the largest tank battle in history. It was the turning point of the Eastern Front, and it was the moment when the German army's offensive capability was broken beyond repair. All because Adolf Hitler wanted to wait for 200 Panthers. As darkness falls on the Prokhorovka battlefield on the night of July 12, 1943, the smoke of burning tanks still rises into the summer sky. German and Soviet recovery teams work through the night, trying to salvage whatever can be salvaged from the wreckage. The moans of wounded men echo across the fields. The smell of cordite and burning fuel hangs heavy in the air. Somewhere in that chaos, a young German tank commander sits beside his disabled Panther, waiting for mechanics who may never come. His transmission has failed, the same failure that has been plaguing these tanks since they first rolled off the assembly line. He has been in combat for less than 3 hours, and his war is already over. He doesn't know it yet, but the whole German offensive is over too. The dream of encircling Soviet armies at Kursk has died in these fields, along with thousands of his comrades. The initiative has passed to the enemy, and it will never return. Far to the west, in his headquarters, Hitler is already planning his next move. Sicily has been invaded. He needs troops for Italy. The Eastern Front will have to manage with what it has. And farther still, in a command post somewhere behind the Soviet lines, Zhukov studies his maps and prepares the orders for the counteroffensive. He has waited patiently for this moment, waited while the Germans exhausted themselves against his defenses. Now it's his turn. The great offensive that will begin in 3 weeks will push the Germans back hundreds of kilometers. It will liberate Ukraine. It will carry the Red Army to the gates of Poland. It will begin the final act of a war that will end only with the complete destruction of Nazi Germany. None of this is visible yet on the night of July 12th. The future is still hidden in the smoke and fire of the present moment, but the shape of that future has been determined. The decisions have been made. The die has been cast. Heinz Guderian was right. He was right about everything, and being right made no difference at all. That is perhaps the most tragic lesson of the Battle of Kursk. In war, as in so many human endeavors, wisdom is not enough, understanding the situation is not enough, even having the authority to influence decisions is not enough if those decisions are made by someone who refuses to listen. Hitler waited for 200 Panthers. He got them, and he lost the Eastern Front forever. The war in the East would continue for almost 2 more years. Millions more would die on both sides. Cities would be destroyed. Nations would be shattered. But the outcome was determined here in the summer of 1943, on the fields around Kursk. All because one man could not see what another man saw so clearly. All because the warning was given, and the warning was ignored. All because the wait for wonder weapons made defeat inevitable. That is the lesson of Kursk. That is the story of Guderian's failed warning. And that is why, on the night of July 4th, 1943, a German general stood alone in a dimly lit command post, holding a telegram that confirmed his worst nightmare and whispered into the darkness, "We are about to commit suicide." He was right. And nobody listened